Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
It's a really wild scenario to think about. You spend 14 continuous years fighting these apocalyptic wars, just trying to save a country from total annihilation.
Right, and you actually succeed. You resurrect an entire empire from the ashes.
But then, the reward for all that, the very state you built, puts you on trial, declares you insane, and executes you to clear the slate.
Yeah, it is a profoundly brutal conclusion to one of the most unorthodox reigns in history.
It really is. And when we look at the collapse of a 400-year-old empire, the reality on the ground is just far more chaotic than a simple changing of the guard.
Because the people left standing in the ruins, they don't have blueprints for what comes next. Central authority just vanishes overnight.
Exactly. So today we are focusing on the Thonburi Kingdom. This is a pivotal 14-year era from 1767 to 1782 in Southeast Asian history.
It is a period that serves as the critical bridge between the complete collapse of the Ayutthaya Kingdom and the birth of modern Thailand. And it's really the story of how an entire nation was reconstructed from absolute ruin.
Right, and our mission in this deep dive is to explore the sources detailing how Siam was resurrected by this singular, deeply complex leader named King Taksin.
We will look at how he unified a fractured landscape into a vast empire, and how his highly controversial downfall paved the way for the current ruling dynasty.
So as we go through the sources today, I want you to consider what happens when a society faces total destruction.
Yeah, like how do you rebuild when every system of governance is just gone? And what happens when the very person who saves a nation eventually becomes a liability to its survival?
Well, to understand the magnitude of that rebuilding effort, we really need to establish exactly what was lost.
Let's set the stage.
The year is 1767. The Ayutthaya Kingdom, which had stood for 4 centuries as one of the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan trading hubs in the world, has just been entirely dismantled by a Burmese invasion.
And when the sources say dismantled, they paint a genuinely grim picture.
It's completely devastating.
Right, this was not a standard territorial dispute or a simple change in the palace. The capital city of Ayutthaya, which was this island city filled with magnificent temples and a highly sophisticated bureaucracy, was besieged, starved, and then sacked.
The cultural and administrative heart of the kingdom was just hollowed out.
30,000 of its inhabitants were marched off as captives and deported to Burma. That includes the royal family, the artisans, the scholars, the bureaucrats.
Yeah, the demographic devastation is hard to overstate. I mean, the population of central Siam, which before 1767 was part of a kingdom of roughly 2 million people, was abruptly reduced to a ghost town.
Just a ghost town.
The intricate networks of canals, the agricultural surplus, the social hierarchy, it all evaporated. The survivors basically fled. The sources describe people hiding deep in the jungle, subsisting on roots and whatever they could forage just to escape the roving armies.
But the Burmese didn't simply annex the entire territory, did they?
No, they couldn't. The Burmese forces were severely overextended at that point.
Because they had other conflicts going on.
Exactly. At the exact same time they were conquering Siam, they were fighting a series of exhausting frontier wars against the Qing dynasty of China to their north.
Ah.
So, because of that pressure, the Burmese king Hisamyushin had to withdraw the bulk of his veteran troops to defend his own borders.
Leaving Siam behind.
Right. They left behind a garrison at a camp called Phosamtan, which is just north of the ruined capital of Ayutthaya. And this occupation force was commanded by a Mon leader known in the sources as Thugi, or Suki.
But Suki's forces only effectively controlled the lower central river basin.
Yes. Outside of that immediate vicinity, the kingdom just shattered into pieces.
Which brings us to the individual who steps into that absolute void, a man known at the time as Phrayatok. Who was he, before the world collapsed?
Well, he was a nobleman, but he was an outsider to the traditional inner circle of Ayutthayan royalty. He was of Teochew Chinese descent, known by his personal name Sin.
And he shows up in Chinese historical documents too, right?
He does. He's recorded there as Zheng Zhao or Zheng Xin. His father was a Chinese immigrant who became a tax collector, and that provided Sin with an entry into the Siamese nobility.
Got it.
By the time of the Burmese invasion, he was serving as the governor of Tak, which was a western frontier province. When the crisis escalated, he was called down to the capital to help defend it.
So he is sitting inside the walls of Ayutthaya in early 1767, just watching the defenses crumble. He's a part of the system, but he makes a decision that entirely rejects that system.
What's fascinating here is his tactical assessment of a doomed scenario.
Yeah, he sees the writing on the wall.
By January 1767, roughly 3 months before the capital officially falls, Phrayatak realizes the defense is completely unworkable.
Because the traditional Ayutthayan military strategy was heavily bureaucratic.
Yeah.
Static, defensive.
Very much so. They were basically waiting for the monsoon floods to arrive, hoping the rising waters would force the Burmese to break the siege. It was a tactic that had worked in previous centuries.
But the Burmese had adapted. They built elevated forts. They brought shallow draft boats. They weren't leaving.
Precisely. Phrayatak saw that waiting for the rains was essentially a suicide pact. So he breaks from his duty. He makes a move that defies all conventional military logic and protocol of that era.
What did he do?
He gathers a relatively small, highly mobile force of just 500 followers. And instead of holding the line, they fight their way out.
They just leave the capital.
They literally break through the Burmese encirclement in the dead of night, heading east, moving away from the capital and away from the enemy's center of gravity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because retreating when you are supposed to be defending the capital is technically treason under the old laws.
Absolutely.
But he isn't just fleeing into the jungle to hide. He has a specific geographic destination in mind. They fight their way toward the eastern seaboard, eventually reaching the region of Rayong. Why the eastern coast?
Geography and economics. The eastern coast was largely untouched by the Burmese invasion routes, which primarily came from the west and the north.
That makes sense.
But more importantly, the eastern seaboard, places like Rayong, Thonburi, and Chanthaburi, were heavily populated by Chinese immigrant communities and merchants.
Oh, and because of his background.
Right. Phrayatak, being of Teochew Chinese descent himself and fluent in the language, knew he could tap into those networks for resources, manpower, and intelligence.
It is a radical pivot. He stops acting as a bureaucrat defending a dying system and starts acting as a pragmatic survivor trying to carve out a fiefdom.
A very calculated shift.
And his actions on the eastern coast give us one of the most vivid tactical vignettes of his entire career. It is June 1767. Ayutthaya has officially fallen by this point. He is in Rayong, but he needs a more secure, fortified base with access to shipyards and wealth.
So he sets his sights on the city of Chanthaburi. The problem is, the local governor of Chanthaburi, a man named Pu Lan, refuses to submit to him.
He won't open the gates.
Right. So Taksin marches his forces to the walls of Chanthaburi, and he issues an order to his troops that is psychologically profound.
What's the order?
He commands his men to eat their evening meal, and then he orders them to physically smash and destroy every single cooking pot they possess.
I mean, that is a staggering risk. You're telling your army to destroy their only means of boiling rice, which is the absolute staple of their survival. It's the ultimate burning the ships strategy.
It really is. You remove the option of retreat. You remove the option of failure.
He essentially tells them, your next meal is sitting inside the walls of that city. You either conquer Chanthaburi tonight, or you starve tomorrow.
It signals a complete departure from the cautious, formal warfare of the Ayutthaya period. This is desperate, high-stakes, charismatic leadership in action.
It's all or nothing.
Exactly. He was forcing his men into a corner where their only way out was forward. And it worked. Fueled by absolute desperation, they breached the walls and took Chanthaburi that very night.
That victory is the turning point, isn't it? It gives him a real domain. He now controls the eastern seaboard. He has access to shipyards, which is critical.
Huge strategic advantage.
And he spends the entire monsoon season, from roughly June to October of 1767, aggressively building a navy and recruiting a new army. He goes from 500 men on the run to a structured force of 5,000 men.
And he does not wait long to use them. By October 1767, just 6 months after the total destruction of Ayutthaya, he sails his newly built fleet of 5,000 men back up the Chao Phraya River.
Straight back into the conflict zone.
Yes. He first takes the fortress at Thonburi, executing the Thai official who had been placed in charge by the Burmese. Then, in November, he pushes further north to the main Burmese encampment at Phosamton.
This is where he faces Suki, the commander of the occupation force. And Taksin doesn't just engage them. He entirely dismantles the encampment, defeating Suki and effectively clearing the central region of the immediate Burmese occupying force.
It was an extraordinary military reversal. In December 1767, having liberated the core territory, he crowns himself king.
And he is posthumously known to history as King Taksin, right? A combination of his old gubernatorial title, Phrayatak, and his personal name, Sin.
That's right.
But he makes a crucial decision right after taking the crown. He surveys the ruins of Ayutthaya, and he decides not to rebuild it. Instead, he packs up and establishes his new capital downriver at Thonburi. Why abandon the historic seat of power?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of the geopolitical reality of the time, moving the capital to Thonburi was a matter of pure strategic survival.
Because Ayutthaya was compromised.
Ayutthaya was simply too large to defend with the 5,000 men he had. Furthermore, the fortifications were destroyed. But more importantly, Thonburi was located much closer to the sea, right near the mouth of the Chao Phraya River.
Meaning he could control the maritime traffic.
Exactly. In a period of utter devastation where agriculture had collapsed, maritime commerce was going to be the only way to quickly generate the resources, weapons, and wealth needed to rebuild a state.
That makes a lot of sense.
Thonburi allowed rapid access for Chinese trading junks. And conversely, if the Burmese returned with a large army, being close to the sea meant Taksin could evacuate his forces onto ships and escape down the Gulf.
It was a capital built for a state of perpetual emergency.
Very much a fortress mentality.
So he has a capital, he has a crown, and he has a navy. But as he looks out from his new fortress in Thonburi, the reality sets in. He doesn't see a unified kingdom. He sees a violently fractured landscape.
Because nature abhors a vacuum.
And power abhors it even more. With the central authority of Ayutthaya gone, the map of Siam splits into 5 separate, fiercely independent warlord states.
The political fragmentation was immediate. You had Taksin in Thonburi, controlling the central river delta. But beyond that, local elites stepped up to claim sovereignty.
Let's go through these other states.
Sure. In the northeast, centered in the city of Phimai, Prince Thephaphit established a regime. He was a surviving member of the old Ayutthaya royal family.
Right, so he has legitimate royal blood.
Yes. Then in the north, based in the heavily fortified city of Phitsanulok, you had the former governor, Chao Phraya Phitsanulok Ring.
He just took over.
He had an intact, professional, provincial army and simply declared himself an independent king. Down in the far south, isolated from the destruction of the center, a local leader named Phra Palatnu, or Chao Nakhon, took control of the Nakhon Si Thammarat regime, effectively creating his own southern state.
And then there's the 5th state, which reads like something out of a dark fantasy novel.
It really does.
Based in the northern city of Sawankaburi, a heterodox Buddhist monk known as Chao Phraya established what was essentially a theocratic warlord state.
Chao Phraya is a fascinating figure. He wore red robes instead of the traditional yellow or saffron, and he commanded an army of warrior monks who drank alcohol and engaged in combat.
That is so counter to traditional monastic life.
Completely. But he capitalized on the spiritual and political anxiety of the era to build a deeply devoted, fanatical following.
It is an incredibly volatile environment. Taksin has transitioned from a survivor on the run to a king in a fortress, but to actually rule Siam, he has to subjugate these 4 rival states.
And the sources show that this was not a quick or inevitable process.
No, his early campaigns to unify the country actually meet with severe failure. In 1768, he marches his army north to take on the governor of Phitsanulok.
And it goes disastrously wrong.
Right. At a battle near a place called Koichai, Taksin's forces are routed, and Taksin himself is shot in the leg by a musket ball.
That injury is a stark reminder to his followers and his enemies that his victory was not preordained. He was fighting highly capable, entrenched rivals who had their own resources.
But Taksin was nothing if not adaptable.
True. He retreats, heals, and shifts his focus. Later in 1768, he launches a campaign to the northeast and successfully conquers the Phimai regime.
And this leads to a moment that highlights Taksin's approach to statecraft and violence. When his forces capture Prince Thephaphit, who, again, is a direct descendant of the old Ayutthaya kings, Taksin has him executed.
A very clear message.
But the following year, in October 1769, Taksin launches a large naval expedition south and defeats the Nakhon Si Thammarat regime. He captures its leader, Nakhon Nu.
But instead of executing him...
Right, Taksin spares his life, brings him back to Thonburi, and keeps him in comfortable custody. I need to stop you there because, to a modern listener, this seems entirely backward. Wouldn't you want the royal blood to legitimize your new rule? And wouldn't you want to execute the rebel warlord to send a message?
It seems counterintuitive until you view it through the lens of the traditional Southeast Asian mandala system.
How does that work?
In a mandala system, power is not defined by strict borders drawn on a map. Instead, power radiates outward from a center like the sun, and its gravitational pull weakens the further away you get.
Okay, I follow.
To maintain control at the far edges of your solar system, you need strong regional lords who have their own localized gravity, but who are personally bound to orbit you.
So a warlord is useful, but the prince is a threat.
Precisely. Prince Thevafit possessed the one thing Taksin critically lacked: traditional dynastic legitimacy. The prince was an existential threat because disgruntled nobles or ambitious generals could always rally around the prince's bloodline to challenge Taksin.
He had to be eliminated.
Yes. Nakhon Nu, however, was just a regional power broker. He had no claim to the throne of Siam. By sparing Nakhon Nu, Taksin demonstrated calculated mercy.
And it pays off, doesn't it?
It does. He eventually integrated him into the Thonburi court, and a few years later, Taksin actually reinstated Nakhon Nu as the ruler of the south, binding him through personal loyalty and marriage alliances. He turned a rival into a crucial satellite in his mandala.
That is brilliant pragmatism. Meanwhile, back up in the north, the political landscape shifts violently on its own.
Yes, the powerful governor of Phitsanulok, the one who had defeated Taksin earlier, suddenly dies of illness.
And that warlord monk, Chow Fra Fang, immediately sweeps in.
He doesn't miss a beat.
His forces conquer Phitsanulok in 1768, absorbing the governor's armies. By 1770, Chow Fra Fang's theocratic state is expanding dangerously far south, reaching the town of Chainat, which threatens the Central Plains.
This expansion directly challenged Thonburi's authority and forced Taksin's hand. In August 1770, Taksin marshaled an enormous force, combining his naval fleets and infantry, and led them north in a sweeping retaliation.
A highly coordinated campaign.
Very much so. He captured Phitsanulok, shattering the monks' forward defenses, and then pushed relentlessly further north to besiege the monks' stronghold at Sawankaburi.
The sources indicate that when the city fell, Chow Fra Fang managed to escape on an elephant and simply vanished from the historical record.
Just disappeared.
But the outcome of that August 1770 campaign was absolute. The last rival regime was dismantled. Within 3 years of Ayutthaya burning to the ground, Taksin had fought his way through the chaos and successfully unified Siam under a single banner.
The map, politically speaking, was stitched back together. But as any historian will tell you, conquering a territory is an entirely different discipline from governing it.
Having defeated the warlords, Taksin now faced a domestic crisis of unimaginable scale.
The survival problem shifts from a military issue to an economic one.
Yeah, because the decade of continuous warfare, the destruction of the agricultural infrastructure, and the large-scale displacement of farmers had resulted in catastrophic inflation and famine.
The economic data from the sources is chilling. In 1769, the price of 1 kwayan of rice, a volume of about 2 cubic meters, basically a large wagon load, was 2 chang.
And a chang is a weight measurement, right?
Yes, equal to roughly 1,200 grams of silver. So a wagon of rice cost 2,400 grams of silver.
And it got worse. By 1770, at the height of the reunification wars, that same kwayan of rice peaked at 3 chang, or 3,600 grams of silver.
To put that in perspective for you listening, before the Burmese invasion, just a decade earlier, a kwayan of rice cost only 12 tambluang.
Which is roughly 720 grams of silver.
Exactly. The cost of basic sustenance had multiplied by 5.
If a loaf of bread today suddenly cost 5 times its normal price and stayed there for years, society would completely fracture. People were starving in the streets of Thonburi.
And this economic desperation leads to a defining moment that deeply cemented Taksin's popularity with the common populace.
He understood that legitimacy wasn't just about winning battles. It was about keeping people alive.
But the royal treasury was empty. So Taksin ordered the recovery of a large bronze cannon, an artifact salvaged from the ruins of Ayutthaya.
He commands that this symbol of the old empire's military might be physically broken apart, melted down, and sold as scrap metal.
And he used the proceeds to purchase imported rice from foreign merchants, which he then distributed directly to the starving citizens.
Breaking down the weapons of the old empire to feed the people of the new one. It is incredibly symbolic.
It bought him a lot of goodwill.
But charity alone cannot sustain a national economy. Taksin needed a vast, continuous influx of wealth, not just a one-time injection of scrap metal money.
And in the late 18th century, for Siam, wealth meant one thing: trading within the tributary system of King China.
Right. The late Ayutthaya period had relied heavily on exporting vast quantities of rice, timber, and forest products to China.
Trade within the Chinese tributary system was the primary engine of Siamese royal revenue. But the Chinese system required foreign rulers to acknowledge the ultimate superiority of the Chinese emperor.
And in return, they were granted trading privileges that were enormously lucrative.
Taksin, given his Techar Chinese heritage, thoroughly understood the mechanics of this system. He needed the Qianlong emperor in Beijing to grant him formal investiture.
He needed the emperor to officially recognize him as the legitimate king of Siam.
The diplomatic maneuvering here is fascinating. In 1768, Taksin sends a Chinese merchant named Chen Mei as his envoy to Guangzhou.
Chen Mei presents a petition to the Chinese court, explaining that Ayutthaya has fallen, the old dynasty is gone, Taksin has stepped up to unify the realm, and he respectfully requests official recognition.
But there is a formidable diplomatic obstacle sitting on the coast of the Gulf of Siam. In the prosperous port city of Ha Tien, located in what is now southern Vietnam, an influential ruler named Mok Tien To had positioned himself as a kingmaker.
Because after the fall of Ayutthaya, Mok Tien Tu had sheltered two princes from the old Siamese royal family, Prince Chao Chui and Prince Chao Sasang.
And Mok Tien Tu uses these princes as diplomatic leverage. He sends his own envoy to the king court in China.
He explicitly tells the Chinese officials that Taksin is a common usurper, an illegitimate warlord who has stolen the throne, and that the true bloodline heirs to Siam are living safely under his protection in Ha Tien.
The Qianlong emperor, whose entire worldview is based on strict dynastic legitimacy and Confucian hierarchy, takes Mok Tien's side.
The emperor issues an edict strictly rejecting Taksin's request.
Right. Through his viceroy in the southern provinces, a man named Li Xiao, the king court essentially sends a message to Taksin telling him to step aside, relinquish his power, and place one of the legitimate Ayutthayan princes on the throne.
So it's almost like Taksin is attempting a hostile takeover of a corporation. The old Ayutthaya princes are the ousted board members sitting in Ha Tien telling everyone, we legally own this company.
That's a good way to look at it.
The Chinese emperor is the major investor who refuses to recognize the new CEO. How does Taksin get around this?
By proving operational competence in a way the emperor cannot ignore. We enter a period of high-stakes diplomatic chess.
What happens next?
In 1769, the Qing dynasty is engaged in a brutal, costly border war against Burma. Because they are fighting the Burmese, the Chinese send an official decree to Mok Tien Tu in Ha Tien, ordering him to capture any Burmese soldiers or commanders operating in the southern regions and send them to China.
But Mok Tien Tu, sitting comfortably in his port city, doesn't want to get involved in a war. He deflects.
Exactly. He suggests to the Chinese envoys that this order to fight the Burmese should actually be forwarded to Taksin in Thonburi, since Taksin is the one actively fighting them.
Which turns out to be a monumental miscalculation by Mok Tien Tu. He essentially hands Taksin a golden opportunity to demonstrate his utility to the Qing Empire.
And Taksin intercepts this dynamic flawlessly. By 1771, Taksin's forces managed to capture 50 Burmese soldiers.
But instead of executing them,
He puts them on a ship and sends them directly to the authorities in Guangzhou as prisoners of war, explicitly presenting them as proof of his military capability and his alignment with China's strategic goals.
it completely reframes the narrative. The old board members in Ha Tien are doing nothing. Taksin, the aggressive new CEO, bypasses the bureaucracy, goes straight to the biggest shareholder, China, and delivers tangible results against their mutual enemy.
Exactly. It shifts the king court's perspective. The Chinese officials realize that this supposed usurper is actually a highly effective, entrenched military leader who controls the territory and can serve as a valuable southern front against Burma.
But to finalize this diplomatic takeover, Taksin decides to completely liquidate the rival board members. He cannot allow the princes to remain a viable alternative for the Chinese.
So in 1771, Taksin launches a sweeping invasion into Cambodia and Ha Tien. He organizes a very large combined arms operation.
He sends a general named Phraya Yomaraj, who is a figure we will talk about a lot, as he later becomes King Rama I overland with an army of 10,000 men.
Meanwhile, Taksin personally commands a naval armada of 15,000 men, accompanied by a seasoned Teoshu Chinese admiral named Chen Lian.
The operation is overwhelming. They lay siege to Ha Tien and capture it by November 1771. Mok Tien is forced to flee into exile in southern Vietnam.
More importantly for Taksin, his forces capture Prince Chao Chui. The prince is brought back to Thonburi in chains and summarily executed.
The other prince, Sisong, manages to escape but dies of illness shortly after around 1772.
With the rival princes dead and Moktian II's power broken, the diplomatic hurdles vanish. Taksin has proven his strength and eliminated the alternatives.
And the Chinese take notice.
They do. By 1777, the king court's correspondence shifts. They finally begin referring to Taksin with the title Wang, meaning king.
It was a tacit, unofficial recognition, but it opened the floodgates for trade. By 1781, Taksin achieved his ultimate economic goal. He sent his first fully official tributary mission to Beijing, welcomed with full ceremonial protocol by the king court.
So, through a combination of ruthless military action and shrewd diplomacy, he has secured his borders against internal rivals, and he has secured his economic lifeline with the superpower to the north.
But there is a glaring problem.
A very big one. An economy needs workers, and a military needs soldiers. As we discussed at the very beginning, Central Siam was a demographic wasteland. He had money, but he had no people.
Right. And this leads us to the most invasive and oppressive domestic policy of his reign. You have to put yourself in the shoes of a commoner living in Siam at this time. You've survived the invasion. You've survived the famine.
And now the new king needs labor.
The manpower shortage is so severe that in 1773, Taksin institutes a rigorous policy known as the saklek, or conscription tattooing.
To understand the saklek, if we connect this to the bigger picture of Southeast Asian statecraft, we have to look at how wealth was measured.
How is it different?
Well, in Europe at this time, wealth and power were largely defined by territory. How much land you controlled. Land was scarce, people were relatively abundant. In Southeast Asia, the exact opposite was true.
The jungles were vast, the land was endless, but the populations were small.
Yes. Wealth was not measured by acreage. It was measured by the number of human beings you controlled who could clear the jungle, plant the rice, dig the canals, and hold the muskets.
So when the population flees, or is deported, the state goes bankrupt, regardless of how much territory it claims. To fix this, Taksin decides he needs a way to track every single body in the kingdom.
The saklek was designed to prevent anyone from slipping through the cracks. Every eligible male commoner, a class of people known as Frey, was drafted into state service.
And to ensure they couldn't run away, they were forcibly tattooed on their wrists.
The tattoo was not decorative. It was an administrative marker. It denoted exactly which government department, or krom, the individual belonged to, and who their specific patron or overseer was.
The conscription department, known as the Krom Suratsawadi, maintained meticulous, highly organized registers.
It is a very tight system.
It is a staggering violation of personal liberty, though. You are placing an unerasable barcode on a human being. It represents a total loss of bodily autonomy. Imagine surviving the destruction of your civilization, finally finding some stability, only to have government officials drag you in, permanently ink your wrist, and bind you to state labor.
And the burden under Taksin was vastly heavier than in the past.
How so?
During the relatively peaceful later years of the Ayutthaya period, these conscripts, the Fry, were typically only required to serve the government for alternating months, roughly 6 months out of the year.
They had the rest of the time to tend to their own farms and families.
But under Taksin, because the existential crisis of the state was so deep because they were constantly at war or building defenses, the Fry were forced to serve the state year-round. It was unremitting toil.
But even wringing every last ounce of labor from the existing population was not enough to fuel the empire he was building. Taksin had to actively import human beings.
And in the late 18th century, importing populations meant forced migrations resulting from military conquest.
We see two large demographic shifts engineered by the Thonburi regime. In 1773, following his campaigns in the Eastern Territories, roughly 10,000 Cambodians were deported from their homelands and forcibly resettled in the central regions, primarily around Thonburi and Ratchaburi, to serve as agricultural laborers and canal diggers.
And it didn't stop there. Later, in 1779, the numbers scale up drastically.
Tens of thousands of Lao people were deported after military campaigns in the northeast and forced to settle in provinces like Saraburi, Ratchaburi, and again Thonburi.
The sources note that even Thai Dam populations from far to the north were brought down and resettled in Phetchaburi.
These captives, ripped from their ancestral homes, became the foundational labor force that kept the new Siamese kingdom functioning.
Which naturally requires us to ask, where exactly were these huge influxes of captives coming from?
Right.
It points directly to the next phase of Taksin's reign. Once the internal warlords were defeated, the Thonburi Kingdom began an aggressive outward military expansion into its neighboring territories. The mandala was growing.
Let's look at that expansion, starting with Lana, the region that constitutes modern-day northern Thailand, centered around the city of Chiang Mai. This area had been under Burmese suzerainty for roughly 200 years. It was technically Burmese territory.
But the Burmese control had grown incredibly heavy-handed. After 1763, a Burmese governor named Thado Mingden was placed in charge of Lana. He heavily oppressed the local Lana nobility, imposing harsh taxes and disrespecting local customs.
The friction was immense.
And the local Lana nobles, specifically two prominent figures named Phaya Chaban and Kawila, decided they had endured enough. They hear rumors of Thaksin's military successes down south, and they realize they have an opportunity.
They secretly rebel against the Burmese garrison and send envoys to ally themselves with Thonburi.
Thaksin sees the strategic value immediately. Controlling Lana would secure his northern flank and cut off the traditional invasion route the Burmese used. He dispatches his top generals to support the rebellion.
And this is where we must introduce two of the most critical figures in this era, the brothers Karaya Chakri and Chowphraya Surasi. They essentially functioned as the military engine of Thaksin's later reign.
Chakri and Surasi lead the Siamese vanguard north. They join forces with Kawila's local Lana troops, and in a coordinated assault, they successfully lay siege to and capture the city of Chiang Mai in January 1775.
It was a monumental strategic victory. It broke 2 centuries of Burmese control over the north.
Thaksin rewarded the local leaders who had facilitated the victory. Phaya Chaban was elevated to become the governor of Chiang Mai, and Kawila was appointed governor of Lampang.
They were integrated into the Thonburi Mandala as highly autonomous allied lords.
But the military machine doesn't stop. Having secured the north, Thaksin looks east to Laos.
The political landscape of Laos, at the time, was divided into separate kingdoms, notably Luang Prabang and Vientiane, which were technically Burmese vassals.
In 1778, a local dispute sparks a much larger conflict. A Lao nobleman and secessionist figure named Phra Vo had a falling out with the king of Vientiane, King Ong Baun.
Phra Vo sought protection from Siam, and Thaksin granted it, formally taking Phra Vo under his suzerainty.
But King Ong Baun of Vientiane ignored Thaksin's decree. He sent troops to hunt down Phra Vo and had him killed.
For Thaksin, this was not just a border skirmish. It was a direct, unforgivable insult to his authority and a perfect cat's belly.
Phra Vo was under Siamese protection. Killing him was an act of war against Thonburi.
Thaksin unleashes his generals again. He orders Chowphraya Chakri to invade Laos. And the strategy they use is a massive, sweeping pincer movement.
Chakri marches his army directly toward Vientiane from the west. Meanwhile, his brother Surasi takes a southern route.
Surasi goes through Cambodia, races a proxy army there, marches north along the Mekong, crosses the treacherous Li-Fai waterfalls, and attacks the southern Lao kingdom of Champasak, entirely capturing its king.
Then, Surasi marches his newly expanded force north to converge on Vientiane.
The military pressure was overwhelming.
Even the rival Lao kingdom of Luang Prabang, seeing the writing on the wall and nursing old grudges against Vientiane, decided to join the Siamese side.
King Ong Baun of Vientiane fled the city, leaving his son, Nanthasen, to defend it. Nanthasen held out for 4 months, but the siege was too tight. He finally surrendered the capital in 1779.
The victory was total, and the cultural spoils were immense.
The Siamese forces didn't just take captives and gold, they took the spiritual heart of the region. They seized the 2 most sacred Buddha images of the Lao realm, the Emerald Buddha and the Phra Bang.
These relics were incredibly potent symbols of divine right and sovereignty. Bringing them back to Thonburi and housing them at Wat Arun was Thaksin's way of demonstrating that the favor of heaven now rested entirely with him.
All 3 Lao kingdoms were reduced to tributary states of Siam.
But as we look at this map, Siam, Lana, Cambodia, Laos, we have to ask how this vast territory was actually administered.
Right, because it's not a unified modern state.
No, it's crucial to understand that the Thonburi Empire was not a strict, centralized bureaucracy with civil servants and standardized laws. The governmental structure was highly decentralized. It was a loose-knit coalition of city-states and regional lords.
The provincial governors, whether they were old Ayutthayan aristocrats who had joined him early on or former rivals he had subjugated, were governed almost entirely by personal ties to Thaksin himself.
The entire structure of the empire was held together by his personal charisma, the momentum of his military success, and his sheer force of will. He was the keystone holding an incredibly fragile arch together.
And the problem with expanding a fragile arch that rapidly, especially into territories like Lana that were claimed by your greatest rival, is that you invite retaliation. You poke the bear. And Burma had absolutely not forgotten about Siam.
Not at all. In fact, the Burmese king Hsinbyun realized that Siam had grown far too powerful too quickly. The annoying rebel in Thonburi was now dismantling the Burmese sphere of influence.
Sinbyushin initiated a sweeping military campaign designed to crush Thonburi once and for all, leading to the ultimate test of Thaksin's reign, the Burmese invasions of 1775 and 1776.
This is where the survival of the state hangs by a thread. King Sinbyushin appoints his most renowned general, Mahathihathura.
This is a man who had just successfully fought off huge invasions from King China. He is a master tactician.
Mahathihathura designs a two-pronged invasion strategy that mimics the exact operational blueprint that successfully destroyed Ayutthaya 10 years earlier.
The first major clash occurs in the Western Theater in February 1775. A Burmese vanguard force, roughly 2,000 strong, commanded by an officer named Satpagyanbo, pushes through the rugged Three Pagodas Pass.
They march into the Central Plains, reaching the province of Ratchaburi, and encamp at a place called Bangkeo.
Thaksin's response is a masterclass in psychological and siege warfare. He marches out to meet them, but he does not order a direct, bloody assault on their fortified camp.
Instead, he orders his forces to construct their own forts entirely encircling the Burmese.
For 47 agonizing days, the Siamese trapped the Burmese troops at Bangkeo. They cut off all supply lines and water sources. They simply starved them.
The deprivation becomes so severe that Satpagyanbo and his 2,000 men are forced to surrender in March without a major pitched battle.
It was a brilliant tactical victory, but Thaksin knew it was only the opening move. That was just the vanguard.
The real threat, the hammer blow, materialized later that year. Mahathihathura personally led a vast, highly disciplined army of 35,000 men through the Mae Lamau Pass, invading deep into northern Siam in October 1775.
The scale of his operation is terrifying. Thaksin's top generals, Chakri and Sarasi, are stationed in the north. They are forced to retreat and defend the heavily fortified city of Phitsanulok, which serves as the administrative anchor of the entire northern region.
Mahathihathura surrounds the city and lays a brutal siege. The situation becomes so dire that Thaksin himself marches out from Thonburi with the royal army, attempting to attack the Burmese rear and break the siege.
And here's where Thaksin finally meets a commander of equal or greater brilliance. Mahathihathura doesn't panic when Thaksin arrives.
Instead, he outmaneuvers the Siamese king. He launches a rapid strike against the Siamese supply lines at Nakhon Sawan, cutting off Thaksin's provisions.
He then forces Thaksin into an engagement at the Battle of Pak Phing in March 1776.
And Mahathihathura wins. He decisively defeats the royal army, forcing Thaksin to retreat south toward the capital.
It is a catastrophe. With the king defeated and retreating, the generals Chakri and Sarasi realize Phitsanulok is doomed.
They have no choice but to break out of the city and abandon it.
The Burmese pour into Phitsanulok, capture all the remaining supplies, and burn the city completely to the ground. The defenses of northern Siam are shattered. The road to the capital is open.
Mahathihathura is reorganizing his 35,000 troops, preparing to march directly on Thonburi.
The kingdom is staring down the barrel of a second apocalyptic collapse. The nightmare of 1767 is repeating itself.
And then, the entire invasion simply halts.
Okay, we need to pause here. Why on earth did the invasion stop? They won the major battles. The north was broken. Thonburi was vulnerable.
The answer is sheer, unpredictable historical luck. Thousands of miles away, back in the Burmese capital, King Hsinbyushin dies.
In the middle of the campaign.
Right. In the political structure of the Burmese Empire at that time, a king's death meant an immediate and highly dangerous succession crisis. Mahathihathura receives the news in the field.
He has to make a choice.
He calculates the geopolitical reality. His son-in-law is a claimant to the Burmese throne. Securing that throne and ensuring his own faction maintains power back home is vastly more important to his personal survival than conquering Siam.
So he abruptly abandons the campaign. He turns his large army around and begins the long march back to Burma.
He just leaves. He leaves his remaining regiments in the south, completely disorganized and unsupported.
Thaksin realizes what is happening, rallies his forces, and quickly sweeps through, pushing the scattered remnants of the Burmese army out of Siamese territory by August 1776.
The kingdom is saved, not by a final heroic battle, but by a twist of fate in a foreign court.
It was a miraculous reprieve. But the damage inflicted during that campaign was profound. The landscape was scorched, the economy was further strained, but perhaps most consequentially, The psychological damage to Taksin himself was becoming evident.
He had been fighting continuous existential warfare for nearly a decade. The stress of bearing the sole responsibility for a nation's survival was beginning to fracture his mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Following the 1776 war, Taksin's behavior undergoes a radical shift. The warrior king puts down his sword.
He stops leading armies into battle, handing total military control over to his trusted generals Charfreya Chakri and Sarasi.
Instead, he turns his intense, obsessive focus inward toward religion.
It is important to note that initially, his religious efforts were highly constructive. After the fall of Ayutthaya, the Buddhist monastic order, the Sangha, had effectively dissolved. Temples were burned, monks had fled or been killed.
Taksin took it upon himself to rebuild the spiritual infrastructure of the nation. He ordered his officials to track down learned monks who had survived in hiding, provided them with new robes, and invited them to Thonburi to reestablish the monastery.
He even financed expeditions down to the southern provinces to retrieve original Pali Tripitaka manuscripts in order to replace the sacred scriptures that had burned in the capital.
He was acting as the classic righteous monarch, the defender of the faith. But he also used religion as a blunt tool of political control, particularly when dealing with regions that had recently been conquered.
When he took over the north, he remained deeply suspicious of the local monks, fearing they were still secretly loyal to his old rival, the warlord monk Chao Furfang.
So Taksin forced the northern clergy to undergo a water diving trial.
Yes, an ordeal by water. Essentially, if a monk wanted to retain his monastic status and prove his purity, he was forced to dive underwater and hold his breath.
The belief was that the righteous would be protected by divine forces and endure, while the corrupt would surface quickly or drown.
It was a severe political purge, dressed in the trappings of a religious ritual.
But the real shift occurs in late 1776, when Taksin's personal religious practices begin to stray wildly from Orthodox Buddhism. He becomes consumed by esoteric meditation practices, specifically a form known as Boron Kamathana.
He spends hours, days, locked in intense meditation.
And the results of that meditation lead to a profound crisis of state. By 1777, Taksin summons the Sangha Council, the highest governing body of Buddhist monks, and stands before them to make a staggering declaration.
He announces that through his rigorous meditation, he has attained the state of Sotapanna.
In Buddhist cosmology, a Sotapanna is a stream enterer, someone who has achieved the first stage of enlightenment and is guaranteed to reach nirvana.
He also begins claiming that his spiritual mastery has granted him supernatural powers, including the ability to fly.
He is a layman claiming supreme spiritual authority. I mean, how disruptive is this to the social fabric of Siam?
It is a complete inversion of the universe. In traditional Thai Buddhism, the king is the supreme patron and protector of the religion, but he is fundamentally a layman. He wields temporal power.
The monks, who have renounced the world, occupy a higher spiritual tier. A king respects the monks, he does not rule their souls.
But Taksin decides to flip that hierarchy upside down. In 1780, the situation reaches a boiling point. Taksin issues a royal decree demanding that all Buddhist monks must bow to him and lay prostrate in his presence.
He is legally demanding that the sacred institution recognize him as their spiritual superior.
The Sangharaja, the supreme patriarch of the monks, an elder named Si, refuses. He stands firm on orthodox doctrine, insisting that a monk is fundamentally superior to any layman, regardless of whether that layman sits on a throne.
Taksin's response to this theological defiance is brutal. He immediately strips Sangharaja Si of his exalted title and condemns the supreme patriarch to menial labor, forcing him to sweep temple grounds.
But he doesn't stop there. He orders the public flogging of 500 monks who had refused to obey the bowing order.
He physically beats the very religious institution he had spent a decade painstakingly rebuilding.
And his volatile, uncompromising behavior wasn't limited to the Buddhist clergy. We see his growing instability manifest in his interactions with foreign missionaries as well.
Yes, the religious debate of 1774. It reads as a bizarre intellectual trap. Taksin gathers his top Buddhist monks alongside French Catholic priests and local Muslim leaders. He poses a specific theological question to the group. Is killing an animal a sin?
The Christians and Muslims answer honestly according to the doctrines of their respective faiths. They argue that God created animals for human sustenance, and therefore killing animals for food is not a sin.
Taksin, whose mind is steeped in Buddhist tenets of nonviolence, is absolutely enraged by this answer. He views it not as a theological difference, but as a moral failing that corrupts his kingdom.
He immediately issues an edict forbidding any native Siamese or Mon people from converting to Christianity or Islam. He grows deeply, obsessively suspicious of the French Catholic missionaries who had returned to Siam to rebuild their devastated churches.
He decides to test their loyalty in a way designed to break them. He issues a decree demanding that all Siamese Christian officials employed by the state must participate in a loyalty oath.
They are required to drink lustral water blessed by Buddhist monks while swearing allegiance to the king in front of a sacred Buddha image.
It is a deliberate provocation. The French missionaries instruct their congregation that they absolutely cannot participate in what they view as a pagan, idolatrous ritual.
When Taksin learns that the missionaries are countermanding his orders, his reaction is entirely disproportionate. He doesn't just argue with them or fine them.
He orders the arrest of the French bishop, a man named Le Bon, along with 2 other senior priests. He has them thrown into prison, but he also puts them in Kang's heavy, agonizing wooden yokes worn around the neck that prevent you from lying down or feeding yourself.
He personally interrogates them and has them whipped with rattan canes. They endure this imprisonment for nearly a year before Taksin finally expels them from Siam entirely in 1779.
This escalating paranoia, this absolute intolerance for dissent, begins to bleed into every aspect of his secular governance. The pragmatism that defined his early reign, the logic that allowed him to spare the warlord of Nakhon Tamarat, is entirely gone.
He begins executing people on the slightest suspicion or rumor.
The sources outline a reign of terror within the court. He orders the massacre of roughly 50 Vietnamese political refugees who had sought asylum in Thonburi.
Among those executed was his old rival from Ha Tiem, Mak Tiem II, who had fled to Siam years earlier. Taksin claimed they were plotting a seditious rebellion, though the evidence was flimsy at best.
In another instance, he suspects a court lady of stealing money from the royal treasury. Without a formal trial, he has her burned alive.
He begins executing prominent merchants on trumped-up smuggling charges, often driven by the whispers of corrupt officials who use the king's paranoia to eliminate their own commercial rivals.
The bureaucracy becomes utterly paralyzed by fear. No one dares to speak out, advise the king, or even report bad news because the penalty for displeasing him has become unpredictable and fatal.
Which really forces us to confront the psychology of this dissent. I mean, look at his life.
Is this the result of undiagnosed severe PTSD? This is a man who spent 14 unbroken years fighting in the mud, surrounded by the smell of death, bearing the crushing, solitary responsibility of keeping an entire civilization from being wiped off the map.
Did the sheer trauma of the reunification wars simply break his mind?
Or is this something more systemic? Is this just the inevitable isolation of absolute unchecked power in a political system built entirely on one man's charisma where no institutions exist to tell him no?
It is highly likely a tragic combination of both immense psychological trauma and structural vulnerability. The fundamental flaw in the Thonburi Kingdom was that Taksin failed to institutionalize his power.
He built an empire, but he didn't build a resilient bureaucracy.
Because the entire state apparatus relied so heavily on his personal magnetism and his claims of divine favor, once his behavior became erratic and violently cruel, the foundational pillar of the state began to crack.
And waiting in the wings were the old aristocratic elites. Many of these families had survived the fall of Ayutthaya. They had joined Taksin out of necessity, but they quietly, deeply resented his elevation of his low-born early followers, his tea-joe merchants and provincial cronies.
When Taksin's madness alienated the monks, the merchants, and the commoners, the traditional elites saw their opportunity to reclaim the narrative.
And the breaking point finally arrives in March 1782.
Ironically, the spark that ignites the downfall of the savior of Siam starts over something incredibly mundane buried treasure.
All right, think back to 1767. During the horrific final days of Ayutthaya, as the Burmese were breaching the walls, many wealthy elites and royal family members desperately buried their gold, silver, and jewelry in the ground before they were killed or deported.
Now, 15 years later, the ruins of Ayutthaya have become a chaotic gold rush. People are flocking to the old capital, digging up the foundations to find this lost wealth.
The Thonburi court, desperate for funds, attempts to aggressively tax and control this treasure hunting. The heavy-handed enforcement sparks a furious local rebellion among the diggers and residents of Ayutthaya.
To quell the uprising, Taksin dispatches a trusted official named Phrayasan with a contingent of troops to march upriver and restore order.
But when Phrayasan arrives in Ayutthaya, he assesses the situation, realizes the depth of the anti-Taksin sentiment, and makes a fateful decision. He switches sides.
He takes command of the rebellious factions, integrates them with his own troops, and immediately marches the army back down the river to launch a surprise attack on Thonburi.
The timing couldn't be worse for Taksin. He is incredibly vulnerable. His absolute best troops, the hardened veterans commanded by his top generals Chowphraya Chakri and Sarasi, are currently hundreds of miles away, fighting a major campaign in Cambodia.
The capital is lightly defended. Taksin attempts to mount a desperate defense of his fortress, using a small contingent of Portuguese mercenary gunners.
But as the rebel forces surround the palace, even the mercenaries realize the political reality. The regime is dead. The Portuguese abandon their posts.
Completely isolated, Taksin is forced to surrender without a prolonged fight. Phrayasan assumes control of the capital. He forces Taksin to officially abdicate the throne and strips him of his royal titles.
To neutralize him politically, without immediately shedding royal blood, Phrayasan forces Taksin to ordain as a monk at Waterun, effectively placing him under strict house arrest while the rebels attempt to consolidate their coup.
But the coup is far from secure. Word of the rebellion in Thonburi reaches Chowphraya Chakri on the front lines in Cambodia.
Chakri acts with ruthless efficiency. He immediately brokers a secret truce with the Cambodian and Vietnamese forces he was fighting, turns his vast, battle-hardened army around, and begins a forced march back to Siam.
In the meantime, to prevent Phrayasan from entrenching himself, Chakri sends his nephew, Phra Surya Afai, ahead with a vanguard force to secure the perimeter of Thonburi.
This creates an incredibly tense, volatile standoff in the capital. You have Phrayasan holding the old king in the palace, and Chakri's nephew holding the outskirts.
Phrayasan decides to break the stalemate. He orders a full assault on Phra Surya Afai's positions at a location called Bangkok Noi.
The rebel forces are fierce, and Chakri's nephew is nearly overrun. The line is about to break, which would give Phrayasan total control before Chakri could arrive.
But the defense is saved by an unexpected figure. The wife of Chowphraya Sarasi, a powerful Lana noblewoman named Siri Rachana, steps into the fray.
She uses her influence and connections to successfully appeal to a prominent Mon military leader named Binya Sane. She convinces him to deploy his troops and attack the rebel forces from the rear.
It is a critical intervention. The unexpected flank attack shatters the rebel assault at Bangkok Noi. The immediate threat is neutralized.
Shortly after this battle, Chowphraya Chakri arrives in Thonburi with the main bulk of his veteran army. He enters the city, and his presence alone completely pacifies the situation. He takes absolute, unquestioned control of the capital.
But what happens next is essential to understanding the transition of power. Chakri doesn't just execute Taksin in a dark room and seize the throne in a chaotic power grab.
Right, he needs legitimacy. He can't just be another warlord taking power by force, or the cycle of violence will never end.
Exactly. Chakri represents the old Ayutthaya institutional elite. He understands that to establish a lasting dynasty, the transition must appear legal, orderly, and justified by traditional morality.
So, he convenes a formal judicial court comprised of high-ranking nobles, ministers, and the restored Sangha.
This court systematically reviews Taksin's behavior over the past few years. They document his religious transgressions, his unjust executions, and the terror he inflicted on the populace.
They officially try Taksin and find him guilty of improper and unjust actions that caused great pain for the kingdom.
The verdict is a foregone conclusion. The sentence is death. But the purge does not stop with the fallen king. Chakri understands the brutal mechanics of power.
To ensure absolute stability, he orders the execution of Phrayasan, the man who started the rebellion, neutralizing that faction.
He then orders the execution of 150 of Taksin's most fiercely loyal officers and officials, and most tragically, they execute Taksin's older sons and capable nephews.
They methodically prune the family tree to ensure there are no lingering rival claims to the throne that could spark a civil war in the future.
It is a thorough, systematic, and entirely ruthless purge of the Thonburi regime's power base. It clears the slate completely, allowing for a return to a traditional aristocratic order.
On April 6, 1782, Chowphraya Chakri formally ascends the throne. He takes the title King Rama I.
To physically and symbolically distance his new reign from the trauma and madness of the previous years, he moves the capital across the river, founding the Ratanakosin Kingdom, and establishes the Chakri dynasty, the royal house that still rules Thailand to this day.
The Thonburi Kingdom, the empire forged in the fires of Ayutthaya's destruction, lasted for exactly 14 years.
14 years. In the grand sweep of history, it is barely a blink of an eye.
Yet the sheer volume of history compressed into that incredibly brief window is staggering. This regime, built by a man who started with 500 followers and broken cooking pots, completely redefined the borders of modern Thailand.
It pushed the Burmese out of the Central Plains, integrated the northern kingdom of Lana, established dominance over the Lao states, and prevented the permanent dissolution of Siam into forgotten, warring fiefdoms.
Thaksin remains one of the most notable military commanders and pragmatic state builders in Southeast Asian history. He was deeply flawed, he was unapologetically ruthless, and he was ultimately a tragic figure.
He achieved what seemed physically and politically impossible, only to be consumed and destroyed by the very state apparatus he had resurrected.
So what does this all mean for you, looking back across the centuries? It leaves us with a profound, lingering question about the nature of historical memory. Think about how a nation chooses to remember a founding father.
Here is a man who literally saved his civilization from total erasure. He fed the starving, defeated the invaders, and stitched the map back together.
But he was then declared insane and executed by the very state he saved. When the victorious new dynasty writes the official histories, how do they balance the narrative?
Do they emphasize the heroic savior to validate the empire he built, or do they heavily focus on his madness to justify his execution and their own rise to power?
Or perhaps is the clean, linear narrative of history, written by the victors, simply a way of quietly erasing the immense, messy, and deeply uncomfortable trauma that is actually required to build an empire from the ashes? Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.